The heat on Tau 7 was the kind that seeped into your bones and stayed there, like a bad country song or a hangover from moonshine brewed in a used coolant barrel. The colony wasn't much. Scrap metal shelters, patchy solar panels, and the occasional, coyote-sized beetle skittering across the rusted ground. But for the people who called it home, it was a piece of earth carved into the stars. It smelled like engine grease, tasted like recycled protein mash, and sounded like old boom boxes echoing through the dust. That morning, Staff Sergeant Murphy McGraw sat on an overturned ammo crate, stripping the ancient M2 Browning heavy machine gun like it was a Sunday ritual. Because for him, it was. Murphy had the face of a man who'd laughed through too many firefights and lived to regret none of them, scarred, sun-scorched, and perpetually chewing cinnamon gum like it owed him money. He wore a faded Marine Corps, tank top from a war most people forgot, a red bandana that had once belonged to his father, and cargo pants that had seen more repairs than a Merc cruiser's warp drive. The Browning, nicknamed Bess, was the only woman he ever trusted. She had a busted left feed lever, a scratched casing, and an attitude. Just like him. Beside him, crouched under the shade of a stripped-down comms dish, Corporal Kim Lopez, tinkered with a cracked tablet held together with tape and prayer. She was short, sharp-eyed, with an undercut dyed electric blue and fingers always stained with grease. Her shirt said, "Die Hard is a Christmas movie" in bold, defiant letters. She didn't take orders well, but she took problems personally. And, right now, her problem was a failing solar grid that had fused with the coffee machine. Again. "You think they're actually gonna show?" she asked, not looking up. Murphy spit out his gum, unwrapped another stick, and slid it in like he was loading a mag. "They're mercs. They were paid. Of course they'll show. Might even be on time, the smug bastards. They said their tech's so advanced it can detect sarcasm." "Guess we're screwed then," he muttered. "I'm a walking war crime under their sensors." The first shimmer appeared above the dry basin an hour before local noon. A distortion in the air, followed by the low hum of anti-grav engines and a flickering swirl of blue light. Then the ship emerged, sleek, obsidian black, shaped like a dagger built by someone who hated curves and loved power. It didn't land, so much as arrogantly float downward, until its shadow swallowed half the camp. From the belly of the craft descended a platform carrying 6 figures in perfectly polished battlesuits and glowing visors that made them look like overly dramatic insects. At their center stood Commander Zilthor Vex. The Galactic Mercenary Guild sent their best, or so the report said. Zilthor Vex was tall even by Threxian standards, four-armed and wearing a cape that fluttered despite the windless air. He had the confident sneer of a creature who had never been punched during a sentence, and the stiff posture of someone whose entire personality was built from military protocol. Murphy rose slowly, brushing dust from his shirt. "Welcome to Tau 7. You must be Zilthor the Very Extra." The commander blinked. "Zilthor Vex, Supreme Tactician of the 5th Skirmish Corps. I am here to inspect your colony's defensive infrastructure and assess its compatibility with galactic security standards." Lopez snorted behind him. "Yeah, good luck with that." Zilthor turned his head in that unnerving way aliens did, like an owl learning manners. "We were told humanity requested protection from local pirate elements. Yet we find you. Underarmed." Murphy gestured to the mounted Browning. "That's Bess. She's shy, but she bites." One of the mercenaries stepped forward, his armor gleaming with polished alloy, and knelt beside the gun. "This device utilizes primitive chemical propellants. No magnetic rail system, no energy coil, no plasma matrix. No nonsense either," Lopez said. "She shoots lead the size of your ego." Zilthor raised an upper arm, and the soldier backed off. "We were told Earth had adapted to galactic standards. This is not adaptation. This is nostalgia." Murphy stepped beside the Browning and tapped the tripod leg. "We adapted all right. We adapted to not trusting fancy gear made by people who've never seen mud, blood, or someone with a grudge and a wrench." Zilthor's voice dripped with mockery. "Our weapons disassemble molecules. Yours merely propel them." "Yeah," Murphy said, "but we only need one." There was a pause, the kind that usually came before either diplomacy or bloodshed. Murphy had learned long ago that aliens didn't understand silence as patience. They took it as challenge. Sure enough, Zilthor straightened. Perhaps a demonstration is in order, for documentation purposes. Murphy smiled the kind of grin. That made Lopez worry and Bess hum like an old engine waking up. Thought you'd never ask. The GMG erected a small test range in under 20 minutes using collapsible walls and energy shields. It looked like an over-engineered carnival booth. Zilthor's men strutted about with their plasma blades and charged particle launchers, putting on a peacock show of deadly precision. Bolts of color scorched synthetic targets in pre-programmed dance routines. The mercs applauded themselves. No one else did. When it was Murphy's turn, he didn't even stand. He sat behind Bess, slotted in the old belt, and cocked her with a lazy grace that made the entire alien crew flinch at the mechanical clack. He gestured to the same targets, now patched and reset. Then he looked at Lopez. Hit it. Lopez tapped the boombox wired to a car battery. Thunderstruck roared to life. Then Bess opened up. The first burst shattered every target in sight. The second chewed through the steel backdrop. By the third, the concussive force alone knocked over half the range. Zilthor's translator squawked in confusion. One of the mercs ducked behind a shield. Another screamed something about sonic vibrations interfering with their neural mesh. Murphy released the trigger and leaned back, smoke rising around him like incense in a war god's temple. Did I pass? Zilthor's jaw hung slightly open. Not enough to betray fear, but enough to indicate the first cracks in confidence. How? Did this weapon breach the shield matrix? It didn't, Lopez said, wiping sweat from her brow. It ignored it. A brute force strategy, another merc muttered. Primitive, inelegant, effective. Murphy stood and stretched. We got more in the shed, bigger too. You want elegant, go dance ballet. You want survival? You learn to love ugly. Zilthor tried to recover. This weapon violates at least 17 clauses of the Galactic Engagement Code. Murphy reached for his gum packet. We ain't in your galaxy yet. We're just renting space. The mercenaries regrouped quickly, their discipline not entirely shattered but visibly shaken. They didn't mock the human hardware anymore. They didn't even look at it. Instead, Zilthor offered a clipped nod and retreated to his shuttle, muttering about needing to reassess orbital threat evaluations. As the ship lifted, a gust of scorched air blew through the camp. Lopez sat beside Murphy, both watching the contrail vanish into the sky. Think they'll come back? She asked. Oh yeah, Murphy said, sliding his sunglasses on. Next time with more troops. Maybe even a battle cruiser. Lopez nodded. Should we tell him we got 2 more Bessies in the garage? Nah, he said, popping his gum. Let it be a surprise. Above them, the stars shimmered cold and distant. Down here, the war was warming up just fine. 3 days after the demonstration, 2-7 was no longer a forgotten mining outpost. It had become a flashing red dot on several mercenary guild maps, a point of interest flagged with phrases like unsanctioned kinetic potential, primitive, asset threat, and possible breach of combat etiquette. Murphy didn't need satellite feeds to know trouble was brewing. Trouble had a smell, a rhythm in the air, a hush in the wind that hadn't been there before. And this time, it had company. The next ship arrived at dawn, casting a longer, broader shadow than the last. It didn't glide in with the theatrical menace of Zilthor's pride and polished dagger class. This one rumbled down through the clouds like a falling anvil, wrapped in spike armor. It looked like something welded in a prison yard during a galactic riot, all jagged hulls and mismatched weapons. A mercenary freighter, no doubt called something overly dramatic like Oblivion Fang or Blood Phoenix, names that sounded like teenage metal bands from the 90s. Murphy was sipping weak coffee from a thermos that had outlived 4 deployments. His boots were kicked up on a cracked crate, and he wore the expression of a man entirely unimpressed by incoming warships. Corporal Lopez stood beside him, arms crossed, her new shirt reading, "Aliens Ain't Got Game." She'd printed it herself, using an old stencil kit and navy blue spray paint. Out of the ship came new mercs, Bulkier this time, less polished than Zilthor's unit, but meaner, hungrier. Their armor looked like it had seen real combat, not parade drills. There were scars and burn marks and one helmet with what looked like a jawbone bolted to the side. Their leader was smaller than the rest, wiry, fast-moving, with tattoos that moved on their own across her neck. Her name, barked without introduction, was Braca. Braca was from a species known as the Vakari, a warlike sand-dwelling race infamous for their love of melee combat and grudge duels. Her eyes were sharp, orange like rusted metal, and her voice carried the tone of someone who considered diplomacy just a slower form of killing. "Your weapons cause disruption," she said bluntly. "Our guild lost 3 contracts because of the footage your unit leaked." Murphy raised a brow. "You mean the footage of a 90-year-old gun turning your boss's range into scrap confetti? You humans think chaos equals strength." Stood slowly, putting his thermos aside. "No, we think strength without humility is a good way to get humbled." Braca didn't blink. "We are here for stress testing, to evaluate your so-called ballistics. You may resist if you wish. It is encouraged." Lopez whispered. "You hear that? They just asked to get punched in the teeth. Politely." Murphy tilted his head. "That's fine. We needed the target practice." The Vakari didn't wait. Their first attack was sudden, a coordinated flanking maneuver using camo drones and adaptive terrain. They hit fast, hard, and with 0 warnings. Within the first 15 minutes, 2 buildings were reduced to rubble, and Murphy's perimeter. Alarms were fried by a targeted EMP burst. Half the colony scrambled into defensive positions. The other half tried not to scream while hiding in storage containers. But Murphy didn't panic. He was already hauling Bess out of her reinforced mount and slapping on fresh ammo belts. He moved with the calm urgency of a man who'd seen worse in places with names no one could pronounce. Lopez was feeding him targeting data through a jury-rigged HUD built from an old VR headset and salvaged ship wiring. It looked like garbage, but it worked. The machine gun sang again. This time, she wasn't firing at targets. She was answering a question. Could a human relic from the last century still outgun alien military-grade tech? The answer came in the form of 3 Vakari units being shredded before they could activate their personal shields. The rounds weren't guided. They didn't need to be. Murphy didn't aim with algorithms. He aimed with hate, grit, and the kind of experience that only came from watching too many friends die under fancy weapons that jammed in dust. Braca's forces adapted. They switched tactics, used bounding cover maneuvers, and lobbed anti-material grenades. One of them nearly clipped Bess's tripod. Lopez yanked it back by hand, cursing fluently in 3 languages and quoting Lethal Weapon 2 between muttered calculations. The colonists, inspired by Murphy's stubborn refusal to roll over, began to fight back. They dug up their own stockpiles of Earth-made guns, AK variants, surplus M4s, old shotguns that should have been in museums, and joined the defense. No one waited for orders. They operated on instinct and stubborn pride. Duct tape became armor. Welding torches became close combat tools. One guy even weaponized a lawnmower engine to throw metal shards at high velocity. It was loud, stupid, and surprisingly effective. Braca watched from the ridge, her visor cracking slightly as a high-caliber round pinged off her shoulder plate. She called for reinforcements. From the ship came heavier units, mech troopers with hydraulic limbs and twin plasma ejectors mounted to their backs. The kind of enemies designed to break sieges and squash morale. Murphy looked at them and spat out his gum. "You know what we need?" Lopez said, ducking behind the remains of the water pump station. "A miracle? Nope. A distraction. You volunteering?" She grinned, eyes wild. "Hell yeah." While Lopez ran toward the enemy flank carrying a satchel full of homemade EMP grenades, each one labeled with names like Welcome to Earth and Yippee-ki-yay. Murphy turned Bess toward the mech units and fired in short, controlled bursts. He didn't try to destroy them outright. He aimed low, hit joints, knees, hydraulic lines. One by one, the mechs stumbled, fell, or buckled under their own weight. Bess wasn't about finesse. She was about force. The explosions from Lopez's Grenades lit up the northern ridge. Several Vicari fell, screaming in static-filled rage. The remaining ones began to retreat, not in chaos but with cold calculation. Braca was watching, assessing. She wasn't angry. She was curious now, The smoke cleared. Murphy leaned on Bess like a crutch and surveyed the damage. 2 buildings lost. 10 wounded, none fatal. Half the power grid fried. But the mercenaries were gone. For now. Braca approached under a white flag that looked suspiciously like someone's undershirt. She walked up to Murphy with her helmet off, revealing scars crisscrossing her scalp like lightning bolts. "You win today," she said. "Your methods are dishonorable," Murphy shrugged. "You came expecting chess, we play pinball. I will report this to the guild. There will be consequences. There always are. But you're still breathing. That's our policy." Braca gave a stiff nod, turned, and left. The freighter lifted off minutes later, this time without ceremony. The sound it left behind was less a roar and more a warning hum. Back at the barracks, if you could call a pile of sandbags and an oil drum grill a barracks, Murphy sat beside Lopez. She was singed, coughing from smoke inhalation, and grinning ear to ear. "You ever think we're doing this wrong?" she asked. "Every day. And we keep doing it anyway?" "That's how you know it's working." Lopez leaned back, wiping dirt off her face. "They're not done. They'll escalate." Murphy didn't disagree. He lit a cigarette that had survived 5 solar flares and a fuel explosion. "Let 'em. We'll escalate right back." There was a pause. Then she asked, "We got anything left in the armory?" He grinned. "We've got a few surprises, including a 50-year-old anti-air system held together with chewing gum in spite." Lopez laughed until she coughed again. "God, I love Earth." Murphy nodded. "Me too. That's why I brought it with me." Above them, stars shifted. Somewhere out there, the guild was already planning their next move. But on Tau 7, the humans weren't just waiting. They were digging in, rearming, and wiring their junkyard fortress with every trick, trap, and anachronistic monstrosity they could muster. This wasn't over. It was barely getting started. The interstellar broadcast went viral before breakfast. Somewhere between the footage of Braca's forces getting peppered by what alien commentators called the ancient bullet broom, and Lopez tossing her makeshift EMPs with a cigarette hanging from her mouth, humanity had inadvertently become a symbol of unrefined, brutally effective chaos. The Galactic feed couldn't stop replaying it. A Vicari analyst described it as combat degeneracy paired with cultural barbarism. A human viewer might have translated that as they got wrecked by a lawnmower gang with attitude. Murphy watched it all unfold from a cracked screen propped against a sandbag. The satellite connection had a half-second delay, so all the explosions played out just long enough to let him sip coffee before the fireballs hit. Lopez leaned in, slurping cereal from a helmet she refused to return to the armory. The entire colony was quiet, watching the galaxy react to their madness. The Mercenary Guild, now bruised and publicly embarrassed, responded with the tact of a toddler denied dessert. They sanctioned Tau 7 as a rogue hotspot, placing it on a blacklist for all authorized merc units. That should have meant isolation. Instead, it invited every outlaw, glory seeker, and unaligned mercenary in 5 sectors to come see what the fuss was about. Bounty threads lit up, placing an open reward for neutralizing the anomaly and seizing the ballistic anomaly designated Bess. Murphy rubbed his temples. "They put a bounty on a machine gun." Lopez grinned. "We should get Bess a hat, or a lawyer." Murphy wasn't amused. Neither was Doc Reynolds, who stormed into the makeshift command post with her medkit, swinging from her shoulder and fury in her steps. She was a trauma surgeon turned colony doctor, a no-nonsense woman with tattoos from a former life, and a scowl that could silence a brawl. "You realize what this means?" she snapped. "We're not a colony anymore. We're a war zone with a cafeteria." Murphy nodded. "Better to be underestimated than vaporized." She slammed a data pad on the table. 3 new ships inbound, no guild codes. They're not coming for diplomacy. Lopez raised her cereal helmet. "So we're doing this again?" This time, Murphy wasn't sure they'd be so lucky. The incoming ships weren't flashy or theatrical. They were modular, retrofitted freighters with hardpoints and weapon pods welded in unregulated patterns. That meant pirates, scavengers, or worst of all, mercs without rules. The ones who didn't care about honor or contracts, just carnage. The first wave hit just before noon, a low-orbit insertion, deploying a dozen drop pods like metal hailstones crashing into the outpost perimeter. The ground shuddered. Bess, freshly cleaned and oiled, stood ready on her mount, flanked by sandbag walls, jury-rigged heat sinks, and a haphazard shield array Lopez built from kitchenware and a salvaged hover fridge. The attackers were lean, fast, and unorthodox. They moved like they were dancing with blades. One wore what looked like bone armor. Another carried an organic rifle that hissed as it fired. Murphy didn't wait. He pulled the trigger, and Bess roared like thunder through a megaphone. The rounds tore through the first attackers before they could blink. One tried to somersault under cover, only to be intercepted mid-air by a burst that snapped his spine in two. Lopez ran point, ducking and weaving between walls, tossing incendiary traps made from pressurized grease and repurposed flares. She laughed like a madwoman, quoting Die Hard as she went. "Welcome to the party, pal." Murphy saw something new. In the chaos, these mercs weren't just here for Bess, they were filming. Helmet cams, aerial drones, live stream feeds, all broadcasting the fight. Someone out there wasn't just trying to win, they were trying to make a point. That's when the second team dropped. Not into the battlefield, but near the comms tower. Murphy froze. They're not here for the gun. They're here to silence the signal. Lopez caught on fast. If they kill the feed, they control the narrative. No more embarrassing replays. Just colonists massacred after resisting. Murphy didn't hesitate. "You hold this line. I'll stop the editors." The sprint across the compound was chaos. Shrapnel danced through the air, and flames licked the edges of the storage bunkers. Murphy dodged a falling beam, rolled past a laser burst, and climbed the tower ladder 2 rungs at a time. At the top, 3 mercs were disabling the uplink, one of them swinging a magnetic axe. Murphy tackled the closest one. They tumbled down the narrow stairwell, landing in a heap of limbs and profanity. The other 2 turned, weapons raised. Murphy didn't have time for finesse. He grabbed the charging cable from the uplink, yanked it loose, and whipped it forward. The insulated coil cracked like a bullwhip, wrapping around one merc's neck. He yanked hard. The attacker fell screaming off the tower. The last merc took a shot that grazed Murphy's ribs. Pain bloomed instantly. He gritted his teeth, pulled his sidearm, and fired. The bullet caught the merc between the eyes. Silence fell. The feed was still running. Back on the ground, Lopez held the line with a fire in her eyes and a grenade launcher in her hands. The colonists rallied, pushing back with everything they had: Molotovs, rebar spears, even a mounted leaf blower, loaded with powdered chemicals that created blinding clouds on impact. Eventually, the mercs pulled back. Not defeated, but disoriented. Their footage, though, now included several close-up shots of failure. The feed was intact, and Bess's barrel glowed hot with righteous fury. Murphy returned to the field, clutching his side but refusing medical help. Doc Reynolds swore at him anyway, but he waved her off with the stubbornness of a man who'd survived worse breakfasts. "They're adapting," he said. Lopez nodded grimly. "And filming. That's new. They're not just trying to win, they're building a narrative." Doc Reynolds joined in, her voice laced with dread. "This isn't war anymore, it's content." The implications were clear. The galaxy wasn't just watching for strategy. It was tuning in for spectacle. Murphy and his ragtag militia weren't just soldiers. They were now characters in a live-streamed gladiator show where victory wasn't the goal. Virality was. The worst part? Humanity was winning that contest too. Days passed with intermittent skirmishes. Each time the attackers grew more flamboyant, more dramatic. One team arrived wearing neon armor and quoting human films mid-combat. Another tried to use a mech shaped like a giant middle finger, which Murphy promptly dismantled with Bess, and an explosive decoy labeled, "This is not a drill." Then came the sponsorships. Lopez read the message aloud, barely containing laughter. A Galactic betting syndicate just offered odds on our next battle. They're calling us Team Boomstick, Murphy groaned. They turned us into mascots. Doc Reynolds was less amused. That means someone's funding this chaos. Someone's profiting from us holding out. Murphy didn't argue. But deep down he knew what had to come next. Defense wasn't enough. They couldn't just keep shooting down fools who showed up for 15 seconds of fame. They needed to end the broadcasts. Not by cutting the signal, but by sending one that couldn't be ignored. He gathered the team in the mess hall, a space made of old shipping containers and decorated with sarcasm. Posters of Earth celebrities hung beside warning labels and cartoons of Bess wearing sunglasses. This ends soon, Murphy said. Not because we're tired, but because they're changing the rules. They want a show, so let's give them a finale they'll never forget. Lopez raised a brow. You thinking what I'm thinking? Depends. Are you thinking of reprogramming our old mining drone to mimic a doomsday weapon? I was going to say cover it in LEDs and duct tape fireworks to it. Same idea. Reynolds crossed her arms. And the comms tower? We boost it. One last message, clear, loud, and impossible to edit. Lopez leaned forward. What's the message? Murphy lit a cigar he'd been saving for a day he knew might never come. We're human. We don't break easy. We don't fold for show. And if you come for us, bring more than just cameras. As plans formed and the night deepened, the colony braced for what was coming. Not just another battle, but a storm built from everything. They'd defied so far. The galaxy wanted a spectacle, they were about to get one. They launched the finale at dawn, not for symbolism, but because the atmosphere distortion would scatter heat signatures better under the low-angle sunlight. The mining drone, once a clunky beetle-shaped excavator, now roared overhead like a drunk thunder god with a loudspeaker strapped to its back. LED strips pulsed across its frame. Duct-taped fireworks sizzled in anticipation. A set of rotating panels broadcast a message in 6 galactic dialects. Human territory, turn back, or be humiliated. The colonists didn't wait for the enemy to interpret it. By the time the first camera drones scouted the zone, Lopez had already fired the opening salvo from her improvised grenade harp, sending a wave of phosphorus arcs into the tree line. Murphy wasn't interested in repelling this wave. He wanted to break the cycle. From the first skirmish, he'd known this war wasn't about resources or even territory. It was about spectacle. Braca's humiliation had opened the floodgates for challengers, each one more obsessed with capturing the right angle than claiming victory. The solution wasn't just winning again. It was ending the need for anyone to try. And that meant disruption. A total narrative fracture. The plan was dangerous. It required baiting the incoming syndicate-backed unit into deploying their mobile broadcast hub, an armored crawler known as a signal spine. These weren't mercenaries with rifles and ego. These were war journalists turned field directors. They fought like producers, measured, invasive, precise. Their gear was polished, their uniforms matched. They used drones as lighting. Their leader wore a face mod that shifted expressions based on audience feedback. Murphy watched them through thermal scopes as they approached the southern ridge. He counted 14, plus the crawler, and at least 5 relay towers deploying with insect-like legs. Their objective wasn't to win. It was to film a loss so sensational, so entertaining, that the betting syndicates would double their subscriber count by noon. Lopez slid into position beside Murphy. They brought ring lights. Murphy adjusted the strap on his vest. Let's ruin their close-up. The attack didn't start with bullets. It began with noise. The mining drone, affectionately renamed Kaboomba, blasted coordinated sound pulses across the battlefield. Part music, part weaponized disharmony. The tones triggered localized shockwaves that confused audio-based targeting systems. The signal spine staggered. Drones lost formation. That's when the human decoys charged. They were real people. Volunteers wearing discarded enemy armor and sensor jammers. They moved erratically, weapons drawn, drawing fire but never returning. The goal wasn't to kill. It was to crowd the broadcast, fill the feeds with chaos, uncertainty, broken patterns. Every second the enemy couldn't produce a clean narrative was a second closer to mission success. Meanwhile, Lopez and Doc Reynolds executed the actual strike. Crawling through the irrigation tunnels beneath the compound, they emerged directly beneath the crawler. Reynolds carried the surge pack, a volatile mix of fusion waste and capacitive metal she'd stitched together during a sleepless week. Lopez had the timer, the remote, and a war drum beat playing on her wrist pad for mood. They planted the charge, retreated 30 meters, and watched the crawler's thermal signature pulse one last time, before it erupted into a geyser of shattered plating and digital static. In the command tower, Murphy activated the final phase. A full-spectrum broadcast override, piggybacking on the now-destroyed crawler's signal. Every screen, drone, visor, and audience node synced automatically. No filters, no edits. Just one shot. Murphy, seated, calm, dirty, flanked by the American. Flag on one side and a live feed of the wreckage on the other. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just spoke. You sent killers with cameras. We sent workers with nothing left to lose. You made this a game. We turned it into a reckoning. You think humanity is entertainment? Understand something. We didn't ask for this war, but we will finish it. And if you ever come back here, bring more than lights. Bring gods. Then he cut the feed. The aftermath was immediate and violent in every digital channel. Broadcasts were flagged, removed, reinstated by protest, then used as viral propaganda by independent networks. The betting syndicates suffered their first major financial loss in over a decade. Subscriptions plummeted. Sponsorships dissolved. The Guild released a statement calling the Tau 7 event a logistical miscalculation. Translated, it meant they'd been humiliated by civilians with hardware store weaponry and a malfunctioning mining drone. But the real consequence wasn't monetary, it was cultural. For the first time, the galaxy began to question not the strength of Earth's colonies, but their restraint. If a handful of wounded, cornered humans could dismantle a mercenary narrative empire in one broadcast, what could an organized, resourced force do? Tau 7 became a symbol, not of defiance but of refusal. Refusal to entertain the idea that humanity needed galactic permission to exist. Murphy spent the following days silent, moving like a man finally released from something heavier than duty. The colonists began repairs, not with urgency but with purpose. The tower was rebuilt taller, the bunkers reinforced with alien alloys stolen from broken attackers. Lopez painted Bess with war stripes and finally returned the serial helmet to the armory where it was enshrined as a relic. Reynolds operated on Murphy that week. The rib wound had worsened. During anesthesia, she whispered that he was an idiot. He mumbled something about democracy. She didn't argue. On the 5th day, a delegation ship landed outside the compound. Not mercs, not guild. Actual envoys from the Trade Nexus, the Human Frontier Commission, and a coalition of neutral planets. They brought water purifiers, agricultural drones, and offers to negotiate protection. But more importantly, they brought a single file. Full declassification of the Tau 7 defense footage, hosted on every neutral archive node across the quadrant. Murphy didn't speak during the briefing. He just watched the playback. There he was, on every screen, dirty and defiant, declaring the end of the game. The footage had been viewed over 4 billion times. It had inspired a dozen colony uprisings, 3 documentaries, and 1 ballad sung by a Vree poet with 14 tongues. Murphy hated it all, but he accepted the results. That evening, the GI colonists held a vote. Not for leadership, Murphy refused that, but for what they'd name the new defense perimeter. They chose Boomline. No irony, just respect. Lopez, now sporting a burn scar shaped like New Jersey across her arm, leaned against the rebuilt guard post and raised a toast to Bess. "She's not a weapon," she said. "She's a thesis." Reynolds nodded. "Won the galaxy," finally read. Murphy stood beside them, staring into the stars. No more threats loomed, no more signals tracked. For the first time since the massacres, there was quiet. And yet in that silence something deeper lingered. This wasn't the end. It was a pause. The galaxy had been warned but not changed. Power still sought performance. Violence still sold. Humanity hadn't escaped the system. They'd simply reminded it what happened when you tried to make Earth bleed for the ratings. Murphy lit his last cigar, exhaled slowly, and whispered to the stars, "Next time, bring gods."